Today we're heading to Egypt, Giza to be exact. And you're going to want to pay attention, because by the time we're done, you'll realize something deeply unsettling. These pyramids, especially the biggest one, shouldn't exist. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling brave, let me know your location and what time it is where you're listening. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's called the Great Pyramid of Giza. That's its modern name. But long ago, people just called it the Horizon of Khufu. Khufu was a king, or a pharaoh, as they were called, who ruled Egypt around 200 and 500 BCE. That's about 4,500 years ago. To give you some scale, this pyramid was already ancient when Julius Caesar showed up in Egypt. In fact, Cleopatra, who knew Caesar personally, was born closer in time to us than to when the pyramids were built. But here's the first big mystery. The Great Pyramid isn't just old, it's perfect. The base is square, and each side is about 230 meters long. That's over 2 football fields. But here's the kicker. Each side is almost exactly the same length. We're talking less than 20 centimeters of difference. On stone, laid out with no computers, no measuring tape, no lasers, just rope, sticks, and human eyes. Or so we think. Even weirder? It's aligned almost perfectly to the 4 cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. So perfectly, in fact, that it's more accurate than most modern buildings. If the Earth were a clock, the Great Pyramid points so close to true north it would miss it by just 3 minutes. How did they do that? Historians still argue whether they used stars, the sun's shadow, or some now lost method. But either way, the result is something that feels off. Not bad off, more like too good. Like maybe someone cheated. And then there's the stone, about 2.3 million blocks of it, weighing anywhere from 2 to 80 tons each. To put that in perspective, one of those heavier stones weighs as much as 12 elephants. The whole thing comes in at about 6.5 million tons. It's the heaviest building on Earth, and remember, it's a tomb. At least, that's what we've been told. But here's the twist. We've never found a mummy inside. Not in the Great Pyramid. No gold, no body, no decorations on the walls. Just cold, empty stone. The so-called burial chamber is bare. It's almost like the pyramid was meant for something else entirely. Some think it really was just a royal tomb and got robbed thousands of years ago. That's possible. Tomb raiding was a full-time job back then, but others aren't so sure. The inner chambers don't make sense for a normal burial. They're hard to reach, small, and built in ways that seem more like a puzzle than a pathway. The Grand Gallery, for example, is a steep, narrow hallway that suddenly opens up and points straight to the stars. Literally. The whole thing is aligned not just with the compass, but with specific stars in the night sky. And this wasn't just symbolic. Ancient Egyptians believed a soul traveled among the stars after death, especially to Orion and Sirius. Somehow, they encoded all that belief, all that math, all that astronomy into one stone building with no cranes, no metal tools, and no blueprints. Modern scientists and engineers have tried to replicate just part of the pyramid building process, and it's not pretty. In the 1990s, one group tried to move a 25-ton block using wooden sleds and ropes, like ancient workers might have. It took over 150 people, and they only moved it a few meters before the sled broke. Another team tried to build a smaller replica pyramid. It collapsed halfway through. So how did the Egyptians manage not just to build one, but 3 massive pyramids at Giza, and dozens more across Egypt, without messing up? That's the million-dollar question, and it's why some people, fringe theorists, ancient astronaut believers, even a few rogue scientists, say maybe the pyramids were never just tombs. Maybe they were machines. Maybe they were power plants, or energy beacons, or coded messages to something or someone. That's not the mainstream view, of course. Most historians believe they were tombs built over decades by skilled workers using ramps and brute strength. But here's the thing, nobody actually knows. And that's what makes it spooky. We don't have a single detailed record of how they were built, not one diagram. Not even a sentence carved into a wall saying, hey, we used a spiral ramp, cool, right? Instead, we're left with stone. Endless, perfect stone. And a creeping feeling that maybe, just maybe, the past was smarter than we give it credit for. You're standing in front of it now, the air dry in your lungs, the stones warm from a sun that's beaten down for hours. You tilt your head back, the pyramid blocks out the stars, and in that moment, you feel it, that old, strange sensation that this thing was never meant for the living. It was built for the eternal, for gods, or maybe, just maybe, to be a god. Let's talk about triangles. Not the ones from math class that made your eyes glaze over, but massive, towering shapes rising from the sand like they were dropped from the sky. You've probably seen the pyramids in pictures. You know the shape, wide base, narrow point, perfect symmetry. But here's something you might not have thought about. Why this shape? Why a triangle? To the ancient Egyptians, the pyramid wasn't just a cool way to stack stones. It was sacred, symbolic. It meant something. But what exactly? Well, buckle in, because this shape might have been the biggest pyramid scheme in history. The triangle was more than a design, it was a message, maybe even a warning. Let's start with something simple. If you take a triangle and balance it just right, it's stable, rock solid. Try to knock it over, and it just sits there, unfazed. That's how the pyramid got its legendary durability. These structures have survived earthquakes, floods, sandstorms, and thousands of years of looting and vandalism. But the Egyptians didn't just want stability, they wanted immortality. The shape itself pointed upward, toward the sky, toward the heavens. In ancient Egyptian religion, the pharaoh wasn't just a king, he was a god on earth. And when he died, his soul needed a way to reach the afterlife. The pyramid was a stairway for the soul, a ramp leading to the stars. Literally, some texts even called it the stairway to the sky. Sound familiar? And it wasn't just about getting to heaven, it was about being seen. The flat desert made these structures visible for miles. Imagine you're a farmer, miles away, working your land. You look up, and there it is. This perfect triangle slicing the sky like a blade. You'd feel small, powerless. You'd remember who ruled you, and who ruled the world beyond. Some historians say the pyramids were the ancient version of political propaganda. Look what we built, they seem to say. We can move mountains. We can command thousands. We are gods on earth. But there's more, because even now, people don't agree on how the pyramids were built, or what they were really for. One major theory, they were tombs. Simple, right? Giant stone coffins for giant stone egos. But here's where things get weird. If they were just tombs, why go through so much trouble? Most Egyptian tombs were hidden underground, far away from robbers and wild animals. Why build the biggest, most obvious tomb on earth in plain sight? And more importantly, why build this way? Let's do some gentle math. Don't worry, I'll walk you through it. The sides of the Great Pyramid slope upward at about a 51-degree angle. Not too steep, not too flat. But here's the thing. If you divide the length of the base by twice the height, you get a number very close to pi. Pi, that famous number about circles. And if you take the height and multiply it by 1.6118, you get close to the length of the side. That's the golden ratio, something found all over nature and art. Now remember, this was over 4,000 years ago. No calculators, no algebra textbooks. Yet the pyramid somehow contains mathematical constants that describe how circles work, how spirals form in seashells, and even how galaxies spin. Coincidence? Maybe. But it's a very strange one. Some researchers think the triangle wasn't just a shape, it was a code, an ancient geometric way to represent harmony between Earth and the universe. Others think it was an energy tool. Sound crazy? Possibly, but here's a fact. The Great Pyramid is located almost exactly at the center of Earth's landmass. Not the geographic center, but if you took all the continents and flattened them, it would sit nearly in the middle. That's not the kind of placement you eyeball with a stick in the sand. So who came up with the idea? Where did this shape come from? One theory says it came from something very simple, a ray of sunlight hitting the ground. In the early morning or late evening, when the sun is low, it casts long triangular shadows. The first Egyptians may have seen these shapes stretching across the desert and thought, that's it, that's the shape of power. They even built a symbol called a benben, a small pyramid-shaped stone meant to represent the first land that rose from the waters at the beginning of time. In their creation myths, the world started as chaos, then order rose from the water in the form of a hill, a pyramid. So by building pyramids, they weren't just making tombs, they were recreating the birth of the world. Let that sink in. Every stone, every angle, every slope was a magical ritual, not just for death, but for rebirth, for cosmic order, for balance. And remember, these weren't isolated buildings. The pyramids were part of massive temple complexes, roads, courtyards, statues, canals. Imagine Disneyland, but for gods. Pilgrims came from across the land to walk around these structures, pray, offer gifts, and hope that the power of the pyramid might rub off on them. Some believed the pyramid could heal, others believed it could grant vision. Some just wanted to feel awe, to be reminded that they were small and mortal, and that the gods were watching. Of course, not everyone was impressed. Some foreign travelers in later centuries looked at the pyramids and scoffed. "What a waste of stone," they said. "Why not build houses?" But even they couldn't explain how they were built. One story tells of an explorer climbing to the top, expecting to find treasure. Instead, he found nothing, just wind and silence. He said it was like standing on the edge of time, and maybe that's the real secret of the pyramid shape. It's not just a triangle, it's a monument to questions. Questions about death, about power, about the stars, and about why humans, no matter how long we live, always seem to build things that point higher than we can reach. So the next time you draw a triangle, remember, it's more than just a shape. It's a whisper from the past, a message written in stone, and it's only just the beginning. If someone told you gold could glow in the dark, you'd probably roll your eyes, right? Sounds like something from a video game or a fantasy novel. But what if I told you that the pyramids, those enormous brooding triangles of stone, were once covered in something that made them shine so brightly they could be seen from miles away, even at night? Tonight we're going to peel away the sand and time and look at what the pyramids used to look like. Not dusty and worn, but radiant, luminous, almost magical. When the Great Pyramid was first finished, it wasn't that rugged, stepped structure we see today. Nope, it was smooth, flat. The entire surface was wrapped in gleaming white limestone, special limestone from a quarry called Tura, miles away on the other side of the Nile. This wasn't ordinary rock. It was super refined, pure, and polished to a mirror-like finish. In the blazing Egyptian sun, the whole pyramid would have shimmered like glass. People didn't just call it a pyramid, they called it a beacon. Now imagine that under a full moon, a giant glowing triangle, as if the gods themselves had dropped a slice of starlight onto the desert. It must have felt otherworldly, impossible even then. And get this, according to some stories, it wasn't just reflective, it might have glowed on its own. Here's where things start to slide into fringe theory territory, but stay with me, because even the wildest theories often start with a grain of truth. Some researchers and pyramid obsessives believe the limestone used for the casing stones had piezoelectric properties. That means, in very simple terms, that when pressure is applied to the material, it can create electricity. Yeah, electricity. From stone. It's a property found in quartz too, and the Egyptians used that in some of their tools and temples. Now let's be clear, there is no official proof that the Great Pyramid was a power plant. That's a modern theory, with no ancient texts backing it up. But there's no denying that the Egyptians were fascinated by energy. Solar energy, especially. They even called the pharaoh the son of Ra. Ra being the sun god. So it's not that weird to think they might have wanted their most sacred monument to glow like the sun, or at least reflect it. What happened to all that dazzling limestone? Well, it was stolen. That's right. Over centuries, earthquakes shook the pyramid, loosening the outer casing. People came from nearby towns and scraped it off. Block by block, they used it to build mosques, homes, roads. Cairo, just a short drive from the pyramid, has buildings made from pyramid stones. The world's greatest monument was slowly dismantled and recycled, like an ancient Home Depot. But some of those original casing stones still exist. Archaeologists have found pieces, still white and glimmering under the dust. And when they test the surfaces, they find something interesting. These stones weren't just pretty. They were cut with such precision that you couldn't slip a human hair between them. That level of tightness isn't just impressive, it's mind-blowing. And remember, no metal tools, no diamond cutters, just copper chisels, wooden sleds, and pure obsession. At least, that's what mainstream historians say. Some people insist the limestone was softened with a secret chemical formula, almost like concrete poured into molds. That would explain the crazy fit between blocks. But if that's true, where's the recipe? No text ever mentions it. No workshop ruins. No leftover jugs of gooey pyramid mix. Just theories. And here's where things take a weird turn. Some legends say the pyramid wasn't just covered in gold-white stone. It had a capstone, called a pyramidion, made of solid electrum. That's a natural blend of gold and silver that shines like nothing else. Ancient texts describe it as blinding, as if the sun itself sat perched on top. Today, that capstone is gone. Maybe it was stolen, maybe it never existed. Historians still argue whether it was gold, limestone, granite, or metaphorical. But imagine it was real. Now imagine sunlight hitting a mirror-bright pyramid, topped with a golden crown, on a cloudless day. It wouldn't just reflect light, it would throw it, like a lighthouse. Some sailors even claimed they could navigate the Nile by watching the pyramids glow in the distance. One fringe theory says this glow wasn't natural at all, that it was guided by something inside, an energy source buried deep beneath the pyramid. Again, no solid proof, just wild speculation. But if the pyramid had chambers we still haven't accessed, and it does, who's to say what's waiting in the dark? In 2017, a team of scientists using cosmic ray scanning technology discovered a hidden void inside the Great Pyramid, a massive, sealed-off chamber above the Grand Gallery. No one knows what's in it. We can't get to it. It's just sitting there, watching, waiting. Some think it's just airspace. Others say it's a room that was never meant to be opened. A chamber holding the secret to how the pyramid was built, or what it really was. Let's pull back for a second. Why all this effort? Why make something so radiant, so massive, so mysterious? Because the Egyptians weren't just building for their king, they were building for eternity. They wanted their monument to defy time, to gleam in the sunlight long after empires had turned to dust. And maybe they succeeded, because here we are, thousands of years later, still talking about it, still obsessed, still guessing. And what's left? Just the bones. The glow is gone, the gold is missing, but the mystery remains. And that, maybe, is the most brilliant light of all. Close your eyes for a second and try to picture this. The hottest sun you've ever felt, no shade in sight, and you're standing on the edge of a massive construction site in the middle of the desert. No trucks, no cranes, no power tools, just thousands of men hauling stone blocks heavier than your dad's car, and they're singing. This isn't a nightmare. It's Giza, around 4,500 years ago, and it's time to destroy one of the biggest myths about the pyramids. They weren't built by slaves. You've probably heard that before. Slaves whipped and starving, dragging stones until they collapsed. It's a dramatic image, and Hollywood loves it. But the truth, way more fascinating, and way more human. Let's talk about who really built the pyramids. In the 1990s, archaeologists digging near the pyramids found something unexpected: tombs, dozens of them, carefully built, respectfully decorated, and clearly intended for the workers. Not kings, not generals, workers. That's not how you treat slaves. That's how you treat people you admire, maybe even love. These were teams of skilled laborers, stonemasons, architects, engineers, cooks, bakers, brewers, rope makers, and yes, the muscle, who all worked together like clockwork. The teams even had names, like sports squads, friends of Khufu, or drunkards of Mankore. No judgment. They weren't chained up or driven like animals. They were fed meat, fresh bread. They drank beer, lots of it. and they had healthcare. Actual evidence of broken bones that were properly set. That kind of treatment wasn't cheap. It meant the pharaoh wanted them healthy, strong, and motivated. Why? Because the pyramid wasn't just a building, it was a national project. Imagine the moon landing, but in the Bronze Age, when the Nile flooded and farmers couldn't work their fields, they didn't sit around. They came to Giza, worked on the pyramid, got paid, got fed, and when the waters receded, they went back home. Some of them were permanent crew members, the elite of the workforce. These guys lived in a purpose-built village near the pyramid site, with dormitories, kitchens, bakeries, and even massive dining halls. Archaeologists call it the world's first construction city. And the logistics, absolutely insane. We're talking about organizing food for 20,000 people. Every single day. Wheat for bread, barley for beer, cattle and goats for meat. That required planning. Bureaucracy, storage, transportation, and the records show they pulled it off, over and over again, for decades. Think about that. They didn't build one pyramid. They built several. The Great Pyramid was just the biggest. The cherry on the stone cake. There were smaller ones for queens, satellite pyramids, and all the connected temples and causeways. And what about the tools? Let's keep it simple. No wheels, no iron, just copper tools, stone hammers, and an almost spiritual level of patience. They used sleds to drag stones across specially watered sand. Why water? Because it makes the sand firmer like a sandpaper road and keeps the sled from sinking. Still, dragging a multi-ton block even a few feet took dozens of men, perfect coordination, and absolutely no mistakes. One slip, and someone could die. They often did, and yet, they kept showing up, generation after generation. Some men worked their entire lives on a single pyramid, and when they died, they were buried near it, with honor. It wasn't just a job. It was a calling. That's not to say it was easy. Far from it. These workers weren't lounging in luxury. Their spines show signs of heavy labor. Their teeth are worn down from eating coarse bread full of sand and grit. Many died young, but they weren't forgotten. They were the beating heart of Egypt's greatest construction marvel. And for a time they were heroes. Now here's a fringe theory, just to keep things spicy. Some people believe the pyramid workers weren't entirely ordinary, that the pharaoh may have chosen them for more than just muscle, that they were initiates into some kind of spiritual order, trained to move in harmony, to sing the stones into place. That might sound far-fetched, but music was everywhere in ancient Egypt. They used rhythm to coordinate movements, pace their labor, and some say resonate with the stones themselves. Imagine thousands of voices rising in unison as a block is lifted. You might not believe in energy manipulation, but you would believe in goosebumps. So let's be clear, these weren't slaves. They were citizens, artists, engineers, some barely teenagers, some old men with gray hair and burnt skin, all sweating beneath the same sun, all chasing something bigger than themselves. And they did it not because they were forced, but because they believed in it. They believed the pharaoh was divine, that by building the pyramid, they were helping him reach the heavens. And in doing so, they'd earn a little piece of that eternity for themselves. That belief, that total unquestioning faith, is what built the pyramids. Not whips, not chains, not cruelty. It was devotion, skill, and just enough beer to get through the day. So next time you see the pyramids, don't just picture a tomb, picture a city, a rhythm, a purpose, and 20,000 dusty, determined humans giving everything they had to something they didn't fully understand, but trusted completely. That's the real miracle. Let's say you're living in ancient Egypt. You don't have a credit card, no coins, not even a wallet. So how do you get paid for dragging a 20-ton block across the desert under a screaming sun? Answer, with bread and beer. No, really. Those were your wages. And not in a poor people's food kind of way. Bread and beer were the currency of the time. You could pay your rent with it. You could feed your family, bribe an official, or even offer it to a god at a temple. It was the original Egyptian paycheck. But how do you keep an entire economy running on wheat and foamy barley water? especially while building the most enormous stone structures on the planet. Well, welcome to the first known case of go big or go home economics. Because what the Egyptians pulled off wasn't just impressive, it was borderline magical. Let's break it down. At the center of all this was a brilliant, complex system built around food, labor, land, and faith. The pyramid wasn't just a structure, it was the engine of the entire Egyptian economy. It kept farmers working, priests praying, scribes writing, and cooks baking around the clock. Here's how it worked. Every piece of land in Egypt belonged, technically, to the pharaoh. You were just renting. In return, you gave part of your harvest as taxes, mostly grain. That grain went into massive storage facilities called granaries, controlled by temple officials or government administrators. Think of them like ancient banks, except instead of money, they stored sacks of wheat and barley. Those stores were then used to pay workers like the pyramid builders. The more important your job, the bigger your ration. An elite stonecutter might get 10 loaves of bread and 2 jugs of beer a day. Lower tier workers got less, but still enough to keep going. This wasn't just survival, it was reward. A system of honor built into loaves and sips, and it wasn't just workers, priests, artists, doctors, even embalmers all got paid this way. There were no coins in Egypt until foreign powers came in much, much later, and yet the country ran smoothly for thousands of years. So when we say the pyramids were expensive, we're not just talking about stone, we're talking about everything. Feeding tens of thousands of workers, housing them, healing them, burying them when things went wrong. And remember, these projects took decades. That's a lot of bread. To support all this, Egypt created what was basically the world's first welfare industrial complex. Every time the Nile flooded and made the land fertile, the pharaoh's agents swept through to collect taxes. That grain kept the pyramid gears turning. But if the floods failed, the system cracked, and crack it did. One of the biggest economic collapses in ancient history might have been caused not by war or politics, but by climate. Around the end of the Old Kingdom, the era when the Great Pyramid was built, the Nile had several weak flood years. That meant less grain. Less grain meant unpaid workers. Unpaid workers meant unrest. And unrest meant pharaohs losing control. The economic engine sputtered, and the pyramid project, like a massive factory suddenly losing power, ground to a halt. And just like that, what had once been the most generous system in the world began to crumble. But during its golden years, it was nothing short of astonishing. Egypt was the richest land in the known world. Gold poured from Nubia in the south. Incense and rare woods came from Punt. Lapis lazuli arrived from Afghanistan. Ivory from Africa, and copper from the Sinai. These weren't isolated pyramids in a dusty corner of the world. They were the heart of a trade network that stretched across continents. And at the center of it all was a triangle made of stone, a symbol that whispered to every visitor, "Look what wealth can build. Look what faith can move." Now let's add a little weirdness. Some fringe historians believe the economy wasn't just about food and gold. They claim the pyramids themselves were part of a larger system, a kind of spiritual power grid, that each structure stored energy, aligned with the stars, and somehow boosted the flow of life force. They called it Kaz throughout the kingdom. That's not the standard view, of course, but even serious archaeologists agree that everything in Egypt was connected. The land, the river, the people, the gods. The pyramid wasn't separate from the economy, it was the economy. Building one was like lighting a fire. It pulled in resources from every corner. It created jobs, food, worship, and once it was finished, the fire slowly died until the next pharaoh took power and started the process again. Each pyramid lit the economy for a generation. Then the people moved on. You might be wondering, why didn't they just stop? Why not build one nice tomb and call it a day? Because in ancient Egypt, stability came from repetition. Building pyramids wasn't just about honoring the dead, it was about preserving order, cosmic order. What they called Ma'at. That meant balance between the earth and the heavens, between chaos and peace. And every stone laid in a pyramid was a declaration of that balance. It worked until it didn't. Once the economy crashed. Egypt entered its first real dark age. The centralized system broke down. Tombs were looted. Temples fell quiet. Even the pharaoh's power faded. The age of the giant pyramid was over. And yet, they still stand. Think about that. An economy built on bread and beer, paid for a structure that's lasted longer than entire civilizations. The people who hauled those stones are gone. The granaries are empty. The scribe's ink has faded. But the pyramid? Still there. Still defying time. Still daring us to figure it out. Imagine climbing a pyramid. Not in a dream, but for real. The limestone beneath your hands is chipped and sun-warmed. The slope so steep that one wrong step could turn you into an ancient smear in the sand. You're huffing, sweating, halfway up one of the world's greatest wonders. And then finally, you reach the top. Except, there's nothing there. Just flat stone, sun, and wind. No golden tip, no glistening jewel, no crystal crown. Just absent. So here's the question. What happened to the very top of the pyramids? Where did the capstones go? Because these weren't just decorations, they were the final puzzle pieces. The sharp point of the pyramid, where sky met earth. And yet, for the most famous pyramids in the world, the ones at Giza, not a single original capstone remains. There is? Oh, we've got plenty. Let's start with the mainstream idea: the capstones were stolen. After all, these pyramids have been looted for thousands of years. Earthquakes knocked stones loose. Locals repurposed the materials to build mosques, homes, and even bridges. So maybe the tip of the pyramid was just one more chunk of rock carried off by someone who wanted a piece of the gods for their garden wall. But hold on. Capstones, or pyramidions, if you want the fancy term, weren't just any chunk of rock. These were special, sacred, symbolic. They were usually made from hard granite, sometimes even covered in electrum, a shiny blend of gold and silver, not easy to chip off, and certainly not something you carry down 400 feet of steep, angled stone without someone noticing. And besides, no one ever found one. Not on the ground, not in a museum, not buried nearby, just gone. Historians still argue whether the original capstone was ever even installed on the Great Pyramid. Maybe the workers never got around to placing it. Maybe it cracked on the way up. Maybe they abandoned it for religious reasons. We've long forgotten. Or maybe, just maybe, it wasn't meant to be physical at all. Here's where things get strange. In ancient Egyptian religion, the capstones symbolized the benben, the sacred mound that rose from the waters of chaos at the dawn of creation. The first land, the first shape, the first something. And from that shape came light. Not metaphorical light. Literal, blinding, divine light. So the pyramid, as a whole, was mimicking the act of creation. And the capstone, that was the moment of spark. It represented the sun at its highest point, the moment when light was born. To the Egyptians, it was the divine focus, the place where the heavens met the earth and poured their energy down into the pharaoh's tomb. So what if that point was never meant to be touched? What if it was invisible, like the final note of a song only the gods could hear? That's what some esoteric theories suggest, that the capstone wasn't a stone at all. It was made of something else, a rare crystal, or a sacred metal, or energy itself. One fringe idea says it was a device. Yes, a device, designed to channel power from the heavens, to gather cosmic energy and send it into the earth, like a beacon or a battery, a star antenna, some call it. Wild. Absolutely. Proven. Not even close. But the weirdness doesn't stop there. In 1874, a French engineer named Giza described climbing the Great Pyramid and finding a strange square hole at the summit, exactly where the capstone should have been. A flat square like something once fit there and was removed. In fact, many who've stood on the pyramid's top describe a strange sensation, an intense energy, a tingling in the bones. Just imagination. Or something else. Even Napoleon Bonaparte, who spent a night alone inside the Great Pyramid, refused to speak of what he experienced. He emerged pale and shaken. When asked what happened, he reportedly muttered, "You wouldn't believe me," and never spoke of it again. We don't know if he climbed to the top, but the legend still lingers. Now here's a fun twist. In 1999, Egyptologists tried to put a golden capstone on the Great Pyramid to mark the new millennium. It was small, symbolic, and disaster. The team couldn't secure it. The weather turned against them. The project was abandoned halfway through, almost as if the pyramid itself rejected the gesture. So maybe the missing capstone isn't just a historical footnote. Maybe it's a question mark carved in stone. A riddle about limits, about what should or shouldn't be touched, about how far humans can go before the mystery says, that's enough. Or maybe, just maybe, it was never lost. Maybe it's still there. Not physically, but in the angles, in the geometry, in the invisible energy that hums just above the stone. Some scholars believe the Great Pyramid was designed to point not to something real, but something imagined, a concept, an idea, a divine blueprint, something too pure to exist in stone. And that's why it's missing, because we were never meant to find it, because the final piece of the pyramid isn't a block of granite or a chunk of gold. It's the part of us that wants to believe there's still something left to discover. You'd think that if someone went to the trouble of building the biggest stone structure in the history of the world, they'd want to, actually use it. Especially if it was meant to be your final resting place. Yet some ancient pharaohs like Khufu, the guy the Great Pyramid was supposedly built for, might never have set foot inside their own tombs. Wait, what? That's right. There's a real possibility that some of Egypt's most iconic rulers faked their own deaths, or were buried elsewhere entirely. And the more you look at the evidence, the weirder it gets. Let's rewind. The official story goes like this. Khufu, the mighty pharaoh of Egypt's 4th dynasty, ordered the construction of the Great Pyramid as his tomb. It was designed to protect his body, store his treasures, and guide his soul into the afterlife. But here's the first red flag. No mummy was ever found in the pyramid. None. Nada. Not even a shard of a coffin. The stone box sitting inside the so-called king's chamber, empty. It doesn't even look like a proper sarcophagus. It's just a big, undecorated block of granite, and it's way too large to have fit through the passageways. That means it had to be placed during construction, before the rest of the pyramid was built around it. So why no body? Some say tomb robbers got to it first. That's definitely possible. Tomb looting was practically a national hobby in ancient Egypt. But others think there was never a body to begin with. Now hold that thought while we look at another weird clue, the pyramid's internal design. There are 3 major chambers inside the Great Pyramid: the subterranean chamber, the Queen's chamber, and the King's chamber, and yet, only one of them, the lowest, deepest one, is carved into natural bedrock. The others were built into the pyramid itself, using massive stone blocks painstakingly placed. The subterranean chamber is rough, unfinished, and creepy. No decorations, no markings, just a hole in the floor and walls that look like someone gave up halfway through. It doesn't scream fit for a god. So why start carving that deep chamber if they weren't going to use it? One theory? The plans changed. Some historians think the pharaoh died earlier than expected, and the workers had to scramble to finish a tomb somewhere else. Others suggest that the pyramid wasn't a tomb at all, but a ritual site, a kind of machine for transforming the soul, less about storing a body, and more about activating some spiritual journey. And then there's the most delicious theory of all. What if Khufu didn't die? What if he staged his own death to escape political enemies, or to disappear into legend? What if the Great Pyramid wasn't a tomb, but a decoy? It wouldn't be the first time a ruler tried to fake out history. In other tombs across Egypt, we find empty coffins, missing mummies, or even doubled bodies, where 2 sets of remains are placed, just in case someone tries to disturb the real one. It's the ancient version of digital encryption. Confuse the enemy, keep the treasure, and your soul safe. And Khufu? He was no dummy. His rule lasted decades. He commanded the most powerful workforce in the ancient world. If anyone had the resources to pull off a cosmic disappearing act, it was him. Now let's spice it up with a little forbidden history. According to Arab legends written over 1,000 years after the pyramids were built, the structures weren't tombs at all. They were libraries, time capsules, hiding places for lost knowledge from a civilization that existed before the Egyptians. These stories claim that secret scrolls, Advanced technology, even prophecies of the end of the world were buried inside. Some versions say Khufu discovered these secrets and sealed them inside the pyramid, not his corpse. Modern Egyptologists, of course, roll their eyes at this stuff. But even they admit one uncomfortable truth. We still haven't explored every part of the Great Pyramid. There are sealed shafts no one's entered, chambers that remain untouched, voids whose purpose we don't understand, and every time new tech peeks inside, we find something else that makes no sense, like the Big Void, discovered in 2017, a massive empty space above the Grand Gallery. No entrance, no signs of use, just silence. Could that be where the real tomb lies? Or where the real pharaoh escaped? Or maybe the pyramid was never meant for Khufu at all. Some scholars point out that not a single inscription inside the Great Pyramid names Khufu directly. The only mention comes from a small red-painted mark found in a tiny crawl space, discovered by a British explorer in the 1800s, under very suspicious circumstances. Some believe it might even be a forgery. If that's true, then who was the pyramid really built for? We don't know. That's the honest answer. And it bothers a lot of people. Because if Khufu didn't lie in the pyramid, who did? And if no one was buried there, then what was the point? Here's the emotional heart of it. Maybe the point wasn't death at all. Maybe the pyramid was about transformation. Not of the body, but of the spirit. A machine for immortality. A bridge between this world and the next. A place where the soul could break free, unshackled from bones and skin and dust. That would explain why the king's chamber is so intense. The black granite, the strange acoustics, the echoes that bounce wrong. People who spend time inside often report feeling dizzy, disoriented. Some say they hear low hums. Some cry for no reason. Some come out with the wild look of someone who's seen something they weren't ready for. Maybe Khufu was never meant to lie down in that chamber. Maybe he stood up, arms raised, eyes open, and became something else entirely. Not a mummy. Not a myth, but a mystery that still refuses to be buried. Let's step back from the dust, the myths, and the broken stones for a second, and just ask a simple question. Why is the Great Pyramid so perfect? Not just pretty good or close enough, but mathematically, geometrically, astronomically, almost terrifyingly perfect. For a structure built over 4,000 years ago, it's so accurate that some engineers have admitted they couldn't replicate it without advanced tools. Now here's where it starts to mess with your head. The Great Pyramid doesn't just look precise, it actually contains knowledge about the Earth that supposedly nobody at the time should have known. Let's unpack that slowly. First, the pyramid's height. Originally, it stood at about 46.6 meters tall. Over time, the top eroded slightly, bringing it down to about 38. But get this, if you take the original height and multiply it by 43,200, you get a number very, very close to the polar radius of the Earth. That's the distance from the center of the Earth to the pole. Now hang on, you might say, why 43,200? That seems random. But to ancient skywatchers, it wasn't. That number is a multiple of how the Earth rotates and how the sky appears to move over incredibly long periods of time. A cycle called the precession of the equinoxes, which takes about 26,000 years. It's the slow wobble of Earth's axis, like a spinning top. Somehow, the pyramid seems to encode this. Coincidence? A few lucky measurements? Maybe, but it doesn't stop there. Take the perimeter of the Great Pyramid's base, around 921 meters, and multiply it by that same number, 23,200. You get a figure close to the circumference of the Earth at the equator. Wait, what? How did ancient Egyptians, supposedly without access to satellites, or even proper maps, build a structure that mirrors the shape and scale of the Earth itself? Historians still argue whether these numbers are meaningful or just a fluke. But when there are this many flukes, it starts to feel less like chance and more like intent. Let's talk pi for a second. Yes, the number from math class, the one that makes your calculator go cross-eyed. Pi, p, is the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter. You've probably heard it's roughly 3.14559. Now listen to this. If you take the pyramid's perimeter and divide it by twice its height, you get a number astonishingly close to pi, within a fraction of a percent. This shouldn't be possible. The Egyptians didn't officially know about pi. They didn't use it in any of their surviving math texts. And yet, there it is, encoded into the structure. And it gets spookier. Another number, phi, the golden ratio, around 1.6118, also seems to appear. This ratio shows up in nature, from seashells to galaxies, to the spirals in sunflower seeds. Artists use it, architects love it, and it's been called the divine proportion. When you take the slant height of the pyramid and divide it by half the base, you get a number close to phi. Again, not perfect, but weirdly close. So either the builders were intuitive math geniuses, or they knew something we don't. And remember, this was all done without calculators, without blueprints, just rope, measuring rods, and possibly something else. That brings us to the fringe. Some people believe the pyramid was never just a tomb or a monument. They think it was a record, a stone hard drive, encoding the most important information humans could preserve: the size of the earth, the movements of the heavens, the fundamental constants of reality. Why? Because stone lasts, papyrus crumbles, libraries burn, but a pyramid that stays. In this view, the pyramid was a message, something left behind for a future civilization, maybe us to decode, a cosmic math problem designed to whisper, "We were here, we knew things. Don't forget." Of course, mainstream scholars are skeptical. They argue that the measurements aren't that exact, and we're reading too much into the numbers. And fair enough. If you stare at enough data, you can find patterns anywhere. But then you realize the pyramid's location also seems intentional. It's almost exactly aligned to true north, off by just 3/60ths of a degree. That's more precise than the Greenwich Observatory in London. And we're talking about stone blocks the size of cars, set down by hand, over 4,000 years ago. Pow! Theories range from careful star tracking to clever shadow measurements, but the level of accuracy is enough to make modern surveyors sweat. So let's recap. This one building reflects the Earth's size, the heavens' rhythms, and two of the most important mathematical constants in history. And it does all of this without leaving behind a single instruction manual. Even weirder, this isn't just one pyramid. The other two at Giza, the ones built for Khafre and Menkaure, also follow a strange pattern. Their layout on the ground mirrors the three stars of Orion's belt in the night sky. One big star, one medium, one small. Just like the pyramids, perfectly aligned, and in the same order. That can't be coincidence, right? It's why some theorists suggest the pyramids were built using knowledge passed down from a lost civilization. Something older than Egypt. Maybe even before the Ice Age. These ideas live on the edges of academic respectability, but they refuse to die because the questions won't go away. How did they know so much? Why encode it all in stone? And most haunting of all, who taught them? The answers might be lost forever, or they might be buried deep within a pyramid whose secrets we're only just starting to understand. Either way, the numbers are there, waiting. Imagine building the most mind-blowing monument in human history, and then leaving zero graffiti, no signatures, no names, no scribbles, just endless silent stone. That's exactly what the builders of the Great Pyramid did. You'd think that somewhere in all those millions of blocks, someone would have left a Khufu rules, or Horemheb was here. But instead, the pyramid's interior is shockingly clean. No hieroglyphs, no murals, not even a carved eye of Horus in the margins. It's a ghost house of geometry, echoing with secrets and silence, and that raises one huge mystery. Who actually built it? We've talked about the workers, skilled laborers, not slaves, well-fed and organized. But we still don't know who carved the plans, who did the math, who chose the measurements that seem to encode the size of the Earth and the secrets of the stars. That knowledge had to come from somewhere, but there's no architect's name, no overseer's journal, not even a doodle in the margins, just stone blocks, set with machine-like precision. To be fair, one name does appear, but it's suspicious. In a tiny crawl space above the king's chamber, in red paint, someone scrawled, Khufu. That's the pharaoh we think the Great Pyramid was built for. That little piece of graffiti is literally the only link connecting him to the structure. And guess what? It was discovered by a British explorer in 1837, a guy named Howard Vyse, who just happened to be desperate for fame. Some believe he forged it. Not to get too dramatic, but Vyse was running out of time and money when he blasted into a chamber using gunpowder, which is as insane as it sounds. And lo and behold, he found the only direct mention of Khufu, in red paint, with a few errors in the spelling, errors that match English versions of the name, not ancient Egyptian ones. Historians still argue whether it's real or fake, but even if it's real, that's it. That's all we have. No grand inscriptions, no decree, no fanfare. Compare that to other tombs in Egypt. The Valley of the Kings is bursting with color, stories, carvings, and names. Pharaohs made sure you knew exactly who was buried where and why. Their achievements were shouted across the walls. Their afterlife plans were sketched in loving detail. Even regular nobles got a decent mention, but not the Great Pyramid, not the so-called tomb of the greatest pharaoh of the era. Just silence. It's almost as if the builders didn't want to be remembered. Or maybe they weren't allowed. That's the basis of a creepy theory, that the pyramid was built by a secretive elite group within Egypt's ruling class. Think stonemasons mixed with high priests, working in total secrecy to create something bigger than any single ruler. The pyramid, in this view, wasn't for Khufu, it was for everyone, or maybe no one at all. Another theory says the real builders weren't Egyptian at all, that they were inheritors of knowledge from an earlier civilization, one wiped out by flood or fire. Maybe they passed their secrets to the Egyptians, who then memorialized it in the form of a pyramid. Not as a tomb, but as a message. And here's where it gets weird. Inside the pyramid, there's a chamber called the Queen's Chamber. No queen was buried there, by the way, just another mystery. On one wall are two small, square shafts, so narrow you couldn't crawl through them. For years nobody knew where they went. Then in the early 2000s, a small robot was sent up one. It reached a stone door with copper handles. A door. Inside a pyramid, leading to, we don't know. They drilled a tiny hole. Behind it, another sealed stone. Historians still argue whether it's a spiritual feature, an architectural oddity, or a hiding place. So back to our silent builders. If you were going to store something, an idea, a relic, a truth, and wanted it to survive for thousands of years, what would you do? You'd use stone. No ink, no parchment, no digital drives. You'd hide it in plain sight, in a structure so intimidating that most people would never dare to enter, let alone explore its every shaft and corner. And maybe you wouldn't sign your name, because it wasn't about you. It was about the message. That's how some people view the Great Pyramid. Not as a tomb, not as a monument, but as a container, a puzzle. A riddle carved in 2.3 million pieces, something meant to be solved, but only by the worthy or the patient. And here's the emotional core of it all. We want names. We want to assign credit. We want to know, because knowing makes us feel in control. But the pyramid pushes back. It refuses to tell us who built it. It shrugs off our curiosity with stone shoulders and blank walls. And in that silence, we hear something louder than any carved name. We hear a challenge. The pyramid dares us to listen with more than our ears, to think beyond names and dates, to open ourselves to the idea that maybe, just maybe, the most important truths are the ones no one is brave enough to say out loud, or in this case, to write at all. Imagine stepping into the darkness, not the kind that frightens you with shadows and whispers, but a deep, sacred stillness. The air doesn't move. Your footsteps don't echo. You're inside the Great Pyramid, walking down one of its narrow stone passageways. Your fingers graze the walls, and the cold presses into your skin like it's alive. You're not alone. At least, it doesn't feel like you are. Thousands of years ago, pilgrims, yes, actual pilgrims, traveled across Egypt just to do exactly what you're doing right now. Not because they wanted to rob a tomb, not because they were tourists with a camera, but because they believed this place was holy, magical, maybe even alive. Tonight we're talking about one of the lesser-known secrets of the pyramids, the fact that they were once pilgrimage sites, and it changes everything. Let's start with a little context. To most people today, the pyramid is a tomb, a dusty relic of death and kingship. But in ancient times, especially during Egypt's Middle Kingdom and beyond, ordinary people, farmers, merchants, travelers, treated the pyramid complex more like a sacred temple than a grave. They didn't just visit, they prayed, they wept, they brought offerings, bread, beer, perfume, flowers. They believed that the energy of the pharaoh still pulsing through the pyramid could bless their lives, heal their sicknesses, even grant them a better afterlife. Think of it like an ancient version of touching a saint's relic or visiting a shrine. The pyramid wasn't closed off to the people, it was open, alive, radiating some kind of divine presence. We even have graffiti to prove it. Not inside the Great Pyramid itself, but around the Pyramid of Giza and other nearby sites. Ancient pilgrims left carvings asking for help. Messages like, "Help me, great God of the West," or "May my son be healed." They weren't jokes. These people walked for days or weeks to reach the pyramid, often with nothing but hope and a little offering clutched in their hands. And here's the kicker. Some even believed the pyramid could hear them. That's right. The architecture was thought to hold power, not just in its shape, but in its acoustics. We'll talk about sound in more depth soon, but imagine this, a stone room so precisely built that your voice bounces and amplifies in strange ways. Chanting here wasn't just loud, it was spiritual, like standing inside a speaker. Some theorists say that's why the builders designed such sharp angles and chambers. They were tuning the pyramid to respond to voice, breath, and emotion. So a desperate mother praying for her child wouldn't just whisper into stone. She'd sing into it. She'd pour her heart into a structure designed to receive it. Now let's zoom in on one of the strangest little clues we've ever found. A small stone bowl discovered near the Giza plateau, engraved with symbols that some think represent pilgrimage routes. Not roads or borders, but lines, curves, and dots that might map out spiritual energy as understood by ancient Egyptian priests. Think ley lines, sacred geometry, power paths. That may sound out there, but remember, Egyptians didn't separate spiritual from practical. The land, the stars, the gods, they were all part of the same system. So a pyramid wasn't just a building, it was a machine for transformation. Walk its halls, and you changed. Kneel beneath its shadow, and you became someone new. And people did walk those halls, not just workers or priests, but average citizens. They entered through the Grand Causeway, approached the Valley Temple, made offerings, and if allowed passed into the inner sanctum. Some believed that even touching the limestone could cleanse you of sin, that sleeping in the shadow of the pyramid could send dreams from the gods. Some people, it said, never came back. Not because they died, but because they stayed. Dropped everything and became part of the temple system. Cooks, sweepers, water carriers. They weren't chasing riches, they were chasing meaning. In that way, the pyramid wasn't just a destination, it was a beginning, a place where people confronted the mystery of life, death, and everything in between. It's not so different from how people treat holy sites today. Places like Mecca, Lourdes, or Jerusalem. You don't go there for photos. You go because something inside you needs to go. And that's the emotional thread hiding under all that stone. For thousands of years, the pyramids weren't just monuments to the dead, they were places of hope. Strange, echoing sanctuaries, where people from every walk of life came with trembling hands and whispered prayers. Not because they understood the architecture or could quote the geometry, but because they felt something, a pull, a presence, a sacred hum in the bones. Some scholars think that when the economic system of pyramid building collapsed, it wasn't the end of the pyramid's purpose, it was just a change. From state project to spiritual center, from tomb to temple. And maybe that's why they survived. Not just physically, but emotionally. Because people never stopped caring about them. They never stopped visiting, never stopped believing. Even today, millions visit Giza each year. They take selfies, yes, but they also cry. They stand there, surrounded by the buzz of traffic and camels and tourists, and suddenly everything goes quiet. They tilt their heads back, look up, and something stirs. That old feeling, the one the pilgrims knew. The one that whispers, you're standing on the edge of something ancient, something sacred, and it still sees you. Let's leave the stone and step into the sky for a moment. Not literally, though the Egyptians might argue we could, because the Great Pyramid isn't just a building, it's also a map of the heavens. A giant triangular compass pointing not just to the four directions, but to the stars themselves. Tonight we're staring up and realizing the Great Pyramid didn't just touch the sky, it followed it. So first, here's the crazy fact that starts it all. The sides of the Great Pyramid are aligned to the cardinal directions north, south, east and west, with astonishing accuracy, as in, within 3/60ths of a degree of true north. That's more accurate than most buildings built today, with GPS and laser levels. And remember, we're talking about millions of tons of stone, dragged across the desert and stacked hundreds of feet into the air, set perfectly on a base that is almost perfectly level. How? Well, historians still argue whether they used the North Star, or shadows from the sun, or some now lost method involving water levels and star charts. The truth is, we don't really know. But somehow, they nailed it. And they didn't stop at compass points. The pyramid's layout on the Giza plateau mirrors the stars in Orion's belt. 3 stars, one slightly off-center, just like the 3 pyramids of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. And when you overlay those star positions over the map of the pyramids, they line up beautifully, not just in placement, but in size. The smallest pyramid lines up with the dimmest star, the biggest with the brightest. This can't be a coincidence. And it wasn't just a pretty design choice. Orion was sacred to the Egyptians. They believed the god Osiris, ruler of the afterlife, lived in the stars of Orion. The soul of the pharaoh, once released, would ascend to those stars and join the gods. So the pyramids weren't just tombs. They were launch pads for the soul. Stargates, in a way. Not the sci-fi kind with portals and sparks, but spiritual launch pads designed to guide a dead king toward eternity. And it goes deeper. The Queen's Chamber and King's Chamber inside the Great Pyramid have narrow shafts pointing outward, upward at specific angles. At first, no one knew why they existed. You can't crawl through them. They're too tight, too narrow, not for people, not for air. But when astronomers calculated the angles, they discovered something amazing. Each shaft points to a specific star. The northern shaft from the King's Chamber, it used to point directly to Thuban, the ancient North Star. The southern shaft, right toward Orion's belt. The Queen's Chamber shafts aimed towards Sirius and other sacred stars. This wasn't guesswork, this was star math. Whoever designed the pyramid wasn't just a stonemason, they were an astronomer, maybe even a priest. They knew the night sky with frightening accuracy, enough to align the pyramid with celestial bodies that rise and set over tens of thousands of years. And they did it all with nothing more than naked eyes and relentless, obsessive precision. Some scholars believe the entire Giza plateau was laid out using celestial geometry, not just aligning to stars, but marking the passage of time. Like a stone calendar, so massive, it could only be read by the gods. And here's where things get truly eerie. The ancient Egyptians believed in cycles, that history wasn't a straight line, but a repeating pattern. The world would rise, fall, and be reborn, just like the stars in the sky, just like the Nile floods, just like the pharaohs, who died, traveled to Orion, and were reborn in the next ruler. The pyramid, then, was a kind of anchor, a fixed point in space and time, that said, this is where the world aligns. This is where the heavens meet the earth. That belief wasn't limited to Egypt. Across the world, ancient civilizations built similar monuments, aligned to solstices, equinoxes, or the rising of specific stars. Stonehenge, the Mayan temples, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia. All different shapes, same obsession, the sky. Because the sky doesn't lie. It's predictable, it's eternal. And to people without smartphones or Google Maps, it was the one thing that always knew where and when you were. Now let's take a detour into the mystical. Some people believe the pyramid wasn't just an observatory, It was a star chart encoded in stone, that each measurement, each angle, each chamber was part of a vast cosmic model, and that by entering the pyramid and performing the right rituals, a person could align their soul with the stars. As above, so below, they would say. Fringe theorists even suggest the pyramid was built using knowledge from a long-lost civilization that had mapped the heavens long before recorded history. They think the builders weren't just honoring the stars, they knew them deeply, perhaps even personally. That's a leap, of course, but here's the part no one can deny. The Great Pyramid is still aligned. After thousands of years shifting sands, wars, earthquakes, and erosion, it still points north. Its base is still square. The stars still rise and set where the pyramid once pointed. It has outlived empires. It has watched civilizations rise and fall, and all the while, it stayed locked on the stars. So what does that mean? Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Maybe the builders were telling us that to understand life, we need to look up. That the answers to our greatest questions aren't hidden in books or buried in the dirt, but shining above us, night after night. The pyramid doesn't just whisper ancient secrets, it glows with them, quietly, constantly, like a compass needle frozen in stone, always pointing to the same truth, that we are small, that we are temporary, and that the stars were here long before us, and will remain long after we're gone. Let's step back inside, not into the sunlight, not near the bustling tourist crowds, but deep into the pyramid's core, into a room that feels less like a chamber and more like a heartbeat. The king's chamber, made of smooth black granite, silent, still, and cold, like the inside of a mountain. But this room has a strange secret. It sings. No, not in a fairy tale sense. Not like choirs of ghosts humming ancient lullabies, but in a real, measurable, physical way. This chamber resonates with sound in ways that defy logic. People speak in here, and their voices stretch, vibrate, bounce back weird. Some frequencies vanish entirely, others hum and deepen, as though the walls are responding. And the deeper you listen, the stranger it gets. Engineers who've studied the king's chamber say it behaves like a resonance box, similar to the body of a violin or a guitar. Certain tones cause the entire room to hum. Not just echo hum, like a tuning fork inside a cathedral, but how? The walls are made of massive granite slabs, some weighing up to 80 tons. They were hauled from quarries hundreds of miles away in Aswan. Granite is rich in quartz crystals, which are piezoelectric, meaning they can create electric charge when compressed or vibrated. So when the chamber resonates, something more than sound might be happening. Some researchers believe the ancient Egyptians knew this. Maybe not in modern scientific terms, but through observation, through ritual, through experience. They didn't need a physics degree to know the chamber was special. They may have built it not just as a burial room, but as an amplifier. Let's slow down and picture it. A pharaoh, laid to rest inside the granite box. Priests surrounding him, chanting, the vibrations of their voices hitting the walls, bouncing, building, merging. The stone begins to vibrate, not loudly, but deeply. You don't hear it as much as feel it, a low, chest-rattling hum that seems to come from inside your bones. To the ancient Egyptians, this wasn't physics, it was magic. A bridge between earth and the divine, a ritual that turned death into transformation. Even today, people who spend time in the king's chamber report strange effects, lightheadedness, emotions bubbling to the surface. Some say they see flashes, hear whispers. Some sit in total silence and feel like the walls are breathing. Of course, mainstream scientists chalk this up to suggestion. A closed, echoing room with lots of history. Of course, people get spooked. It's natural. But some effects are measurable. The chamber's dimensions are mathematically precise. The room forms a double 3-4-5 ratio, which is the simplest form of a right triangle, a key to stable structures and musical harmony. The granite box, often misidentified as a sarcophagus, also resonates at around 440 Hz, a frequency used in modern music tuning. Coincidence or design? Historians still argue whether this was intentional or a lucky result of smart engineering. But then there's the mystery of the relieving chambers above the king's chamber, 5 stacked spaces meant to take pressure off the ceiling, except they weren't really needed. Smaller pyramids didn't bother with them. So why here? Some say those extra chambers amplify the acoustics, like a series of sound boxes stacked above the main speaker. In fact, when people knock on the walls or play instruments inside, the sound reverberates all the way up into those chambers and back down again. It's like the pyramid isn't just a building, it's an instrument. And maybe not just for sound. Here comes the fringe. Some theorists believe the pyramid was a kind of energy machine, one that used sound, vibration, and Earth's natural energy to create something power, healing, a kind of electromagnetic field. These ideas stretch far beyond mainstream archaeology, but they keep showing up for a reason. Because something about that chamber doesn't feel normal. Even Nikola Tesla, the brilliant inventor and energy pioneer, was obsessed with the pyramids. He believed they were resonant energy devices, capable of tapping into frequencies that modern science barely understands. He once said, "If you want to understand the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration." And the Great Pyramid seems to have all three. Let's bring it back to Earth for a moment. Even if the King's Chamber isn't a magical machine or alien amplifier, it still matters. Because the ancient Egyptians believed in the power of sound. They used chanting in temples. They carved music into myths. They saw voice as creation, breath as life. And here in this stone room, they created a space where breath could become echo, and echo could become eternity. That's the emotional heart of it. This wasn't just an architectural feat. It was a statement, a sacred space, built not for the eyes, but for the ears and the soul. A place where silence wasn't empty. It was charged, full, waiting. And maybe that's why the chamber still draws people in. Why modern seekers, sound engineers, monks, and mystics all make the journey, not to see what's inside, but to feel it. To hum a low note, and see if the pyramid hums back. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't, but it's always listening. It's the middle of the afternoon in ancient Giza, and the desert is alive. Vendors are shouting. The scent of grilled fish and honey cakes fills the air, and the streets are packed with people, pilgrims, priests, merchants, kids running with bread in their arms. And towering above it all, like a god resting on the edge of the world, is the Great Pyramid. Yeah, you heard that right. Ancient Giza, it wasn't silent, it wasn't lonely, it wasn't a mystical ghost town with 2 camels and a breeze. It was booming. That's the part most people forget. The pyramids weren't just sitting out there in the middle of nowhere, waiting for archaeologists to stumble across them. For much of their early life, they were the heart of a city, a spiritual theme park, a national monument, and in some ways, Egypt's first mega tourist attraction. Let's break that down. We tend to picture the pyramids as isolated, cut off from the world by centuries of wind and sand. And today, sure, they feel distant, solemn. But when they were new, they were part of a massive, bustling complex. Each pyramid had a whole support system built around it, a valley temple at the Nile's edge, a causeway leading uphill, mortuary temples, satellite pyramids for queens, workers' villages, storehouses, priests' quarters, everything. And it wasn't just for royal business. Over time, ordinary Egyptians started visiting. Some came to pray, some to work, some to sell things, some to just marvel. We even have their graffiti, not the kind you see in modern cities. No Tutankhamun sucks scrolled in eyeliner, but prayerful inscriptions like, "May I be granted a good burial here," or "In the shadow of the pyramid, I am purified." People left traces of longing on the walls, like pilgrims at a cathedral. Imagine approaching that huge causeway. You're holding a clay jar of beer, or a woven basket of figs to leave as an offering. The closer you get, the more your skin tingles. You smell incense burning. You hear chants echoing from the inner temple. You walk past markets and workshops, priests in white linen robes, dancers performing for a festival. It's all sacred, but it's also alive. This was spiritual and social, like a county fair meets a holy site. And it attracted everyone. Farmers, soldiers, travelers from Nubia, Libya, the Sinai. Egypt's borders were porous. and people came with questions, offerings, illnesses, dreams. Some believed the pyramid could heal. Others believed it could grant fertility. Some simply wanted to say they'd touched it. You know how people today brag about visiting the Eiffel Tower or hiking Machu Picchu? Same idea, only instead of Instagram, you carved your name in limestone and hoped the gods noticed. It wasn't always peaceful, of course. With popularity comes problems. The priests who managed the pyramid complex had enormous power, and that attracted greed, corruption, jealousy. The temple system needed grain, wine, meat, linen, and not everyone who brought those things was doing it from the kindness of their heart. Taxes were collected, workers underpaid, and yes, people tried to scam the system. Oh yes, high priest, I totally brought 40 loaves, you counted 32. Maybe rats? But still, the pyramid endured. Even in times of national crisis, famines, invasions, revolts, people kept coming. And that's important, because it means the pyramid wasn't just a pharaoh's monument. It was a cultural anchor, something everyone, no matter how poor or far-flung, could feel connected to. It was theirs. Some scholars believe there were actual festivals held at the pyramids, ceremonies honoring the sun, the dead, the gods, torchlit processions at night, rituals that involved drums, songs, offerings, and even reenactments of mythological battles between gods and demons. That sounds less like a tomb and more like a sacred stage. And over time, the site evolved. Temples were rebuilt. New rulers added their own touches. Some tried to associate themselves with Khufu's glory by placing their tombs nearby. Others looted what they could and left. The city grew, shrank, shifted. Dynasties fell, rose and fell again. But the pyramid stayed. And it watched. It watched the transition from spiritual hub to ghost town. It watched sand cover the causeway. It watched temples crumble and the pilgrims stop coming. It watched Napoleon ride up on horseback. It watched 19th century tourists pose awkwardly for black and white photos. It watched planes fly overhead. And it watched iPhones appear. But back then, when the air smelled like lotus and garlic, and prayers rose into the sky, it was more than a wonder. It was a living part of society. And maybe that's the part we forget. We think of pyramids as dead things, silent stone. But they weren't built to be dead. They were built to be eternal. And for centuries they pulsed with life. People laughed here, cried here, fell in love here, gave birth, got married, died. Kids ran through temple courtyards. Dogs barked. Markets buzzed. It wasn't some distant mystery. It was home. So the next time you see the pyramids on a postcard or in a textbook, don't picture empty sand and stillness. Picture a child standing at the base, eyes wide with wonder, a priest lighting incense, a mother whispering a wish into the wind, a crowd of pilgrims in linen robes, walking single file toward a structure so massive, so strange, so powerful that they couldn't help but believe. Something divine lives here, and maybe it still does. Let's drift away from the noise and color of ancient Giza and wander into silence again, real silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the eerie kind. The kind that makes your ears ring, because even the air feels like it's holding its breath. We're deep in the desert now, miles from where tourists walk and camels sigh, and right here, under your feet, is nothing. But that's just what it looks like. Because this isn't empty land, this is where entire cities used to be. Tonight we're talking about one of the quietest, most haunting mysteries of the pyramids. Not the ones that remain, but the ones that are gone. The towns, the shrines, the roads, the people, all swallowed by sand, time and forgetting, because the desert doesn't just hide the past, sometimes it erases it. Let's start with a strange truth. Ancient Egypt was full of pyramids, not just the famous ones at Giza, but dozens more, stretching up and down the Nile like a trail of stone breadcrumbs. Some were tall and sleek, some were smaller and sloppier, some barely got past the base before everything stopped, and around them, settlements, villages of workers, homes of priests, storage facilities, bakeries, wells, workshops, temples. Think of them like little towns, clustered around each pyramid. buzzing with life. And then, nothing. Where did they go? In some places, we found traces, foundations, pottery shards, broken walls, but in others, it's like the earth just swallowed them whole. Take Abu Sir, for example, just south of Giza. It was once a major royal necropolis, home to several pyramids and a sprawling complex of temples. In its prime, it rivaled Giza in size and importance. Now, it's a ghost site, buried, crumbling. The wind covers more each year. Or El Lisht, another site where Middle Kingdom pharaohs built pyramids and entire city plans to go with them. Temples, canals, streets, gone, mostly under farmland or desert now, and we only found it again in the last 100 years. Pure luck. This keeps happening. The farther you move from the tourist zones, the more you realize so much of ancient Egypt is missing. Not stolen, not destroyed, just buried. Sand in Egypt isn't like sand at the beach. It's not soft and playful. It moves like a slow monster. It creeps. It rises. A storm can cover a wall in an hour, a doorway in a day, a city in a few decades. And once it's gone, it's gone. But here's the eerie part. Many of these lost places were known to the ancients themselves. There are hieroglyphic records that mention temples now consumed by the desert, tombs said to be beneath the sands where no man walks, whole dynasties that vanished from the official lists, their monuments swallowed up, their names erased. Some of this was natural, but some might have been on purpose. Ancient Egypt was a long, long story, over 3,000 years. And with each new ruler came a little rewriting, a few erasures, a touch of historical editing. Pharaohs who didn't like their predecessors sometimes chiseled their names off monuments, or let their cities fade into ruin. If no one remembered your name, it was like you never existed. A terrifying thought. One legend tells of a pyramid built so cursed, so unholy by later rulers, that they dismantled it brick by brick. The stones were scattered, the workers silenced. Even the name of the pharaoh who built it was removed from history. No one knows where it stood. No one can agree on who he was. It's called the Lost Pyramid. Some say it still exists, buried beneath dunes, unexcavated. Others say it's a myth, a whisper from those who feared what memory could do. But let's not get too mystical. Sometimes cities die because the river moved. The Nile is a mighty thing, but it's also moody. Over centuries, it shifts. Floods change patterns. Banks collapse. A pyramid that once stood by a busy port might end up in the middle of nowhere. The people leave. The desert takes over. The stone disappears beneath centuries of silence. But sometimes, something peeks out. A corner of a block. A broken statue. A buried staircase. That's how many sites have been rediscovered in the last 200 years by accident. A farmer digging a well, a child chasing a goat, a military survey stumbling on a mound that felt just a little too square. What's still under the sand? We don't know. That's the thrilling and frustrating part of Egyptian archaeology. For every pyramid we've found, there might be another waiting. For every city we've mapped, another sleeps below. The Great Pyramid gets all the attention, but it's the silence of the missing ones that makes your skin crawl. Because when a pyramid disappears, it doesn't leave behind an explosion. It doesn't shout. It just slowly stops being seen. And in a place where memory equals immortality, that's the worst death of all. So let's feel this for a moment. Imagine you're standing in the desert. The wind brushes your ankles. The sun presses on your back. You look down and kick at the sand, and maybe, just maybe, you uncover something. The edge of a stone, the tip of a carving, a whisper from a world that should be gone, but isn't. Because beneath you is a city. Beneath you is a pyramid, and it's waiting. Still, it always starts the same way. A few footprints in the sand, a crack in the door of a forgotten tomb, a whispered rumor that a royal chamber lies just beyond that crumbling wall, and then someone says it out loud. The word everyone wants to hear and no one dares to trust. Gold. And for thousands of years, people chased it. Tomb raiders, adventurers, grave robbers, even governments, all trying to crack open the secrets of the pyramids. and walk away rich. Because where there's a pyramid, there's supposed to be treasure. And not just a few coins or trinkets. We're talking about rooms of it. Piles. Thrones made of solid gold. Necklaces heavy enough to drag your neck forward. Funeral masks so intricate they seem to breathe. See, the ancient Egyptians buried their pharaohs with everything they thought they'd need in the afterlife. Clothes, food, furniture, weapons, and yes, tons of treasure. It wasn't about being flashy, it was spiritual banking. You paid your way into the next world, your soul was judged, your heart weighed, and your gold helped smooth the journey. But here's the twist. This gold rush didn't just loot tombs, it may have helped collapse an entire civilization. Let's talk about the economics of divine theft. But gold, you might think that looters waited until a pharaoh had been dead for centuries before trying their luck. Nope. Some tombs were hit within months of being sealed, sometimes by the very workers who helped build them. And long before modern archaeologists ever arrived, tomb robbers were already busy. In fact, some of the earliest examples of legal documents in ancient Egypt are police reports describing tomb robberies. 3 men entered the tomb, they took a necklace, they were caught, they were whipped, that kind of thing. Think about it. You spend 10 years carving and stacking stone for a king who lives in luxury, while you eat sand-filled bread. You know where the gold is, you know when the guards rotate, and one night you don't go home. You dig. It was so common, in fact, that later pharaohs developed ways to trick future looters. Fake doors, hidden passages, decoy tombs. One pharaoh even buried his treasure in a well to confuse intruders. Remember, we've never found a mummy inside the Great Pyramid. No sarcophagus, no treasure, no inscriptions on the walls, just empty stone. And the pyramid, that was the biggest decoy of all. Some believe it was all taken. Others believe there was nothing to steal. Because gold wasn't just religious, it was economic. It powered trade, diplomacy, military alliances. It was what made Egypt powerful. But if all that gold disappears into the hands of thieves, and then disappears again into black markets or foreign kingdoms, you start to see a drain. But here's the kicker. This constant looting didn't just rob a few kings. It robbed the country. And that's what happened. During Egypt's first intermediate period, a time of drought, famine, political chaos, many scholars point to a loss of centralized power. The pharaohs weren't divine anymore. They were vulnerable, broke. Their tombs were being looted. Their authority questioned. Their economy weakened. One theory says tomb robbing became so rampant that it crippled the treasury. The state couldn't pay priests, workers, or soldiers. Cities rebelled. Provinces broke away, and what had once been the richest kingdom in the world began to fracture. In trying to steal eternity, the thieves may have killed it. Let's go darker. Some fringe historians believe that the Great Pyramid was looted, but not by petty criminals. They say priests did it. Temple authorities who knew where the riches were hidden, who had the power to cover their tracks, and who redirected wealth from royal tombs into the temple economy. That's how some temples, especially in Thebes, became wealthier than the pharaoh himself. Think about that. Religious leaders taking power from the king by controlling the dead. And the gold. Not melted into coins or jewelry, but reworked into idols, offerings, sacred tools. Gold that once belonged to Khufu might have ended up around the neck of a statue of Amun centuries later. That's one way to erase a legacy. Melt it down. But the deeper question is, did they know what they were destroying? Did the looters realize that by taking treasure meant for the afterlife? They weren't just stealing wealth, they were damning the soul. In Egyptian belief, a person needed their body, their name, and their burial goods to make it through the underworld. Take those away, and the spirit became lost. That's the emotional wound here. Because even today, we don't know the names of most tomb robbers. But we do know the names of the kings they robbed. Their faces, their dreams, their fear. So in a way, the pyramid wasn't just protecting gold, it was protecting identity. And once that was gone, so was the person. And maybe that's the biggest curse of all. Not that a tomb is robbed, but that it's forgotten. And yet, the pyramids remain. Empty? Yes. Not quite. But ruined? And maybe that's the message. Gold can be stolen. Names can be erased. But the pyramid, because despite all the looting, all the greed, and all the schemes to strip them bare, they still stand. Still massive. Still silent. Still proud. They outlived the very gold they were meant to guard. Not out of the pyramid, but out of Egypt itself. Out across the burning sands, the Nile, and into the wider ancient world. Because the Great Pyramid wasn't just a tomb, or a temple, or even a message. At one point in history, it may have been something more dangerous than all of those things combined. It endures. Let's zoom out for a moment. It may have been leverage. Tonight, we're talking about how a single pyramid, just a pile of stone, technically might have helped pay for a war. Here's something wild to wrap your head around. When Egypt built its most massive pyramids, it wasn't just showing off. It was flexing. These structures weren't built in a vacuum. They were seen by travelers, merchants, ambassadors. Word of their size and power spread across borders, kingdoms, continents, and those rumors, they worked like a weapon. Let's go back to the Middle Kingdom, roughly 1,000 years after the Great Pyramid was built. By then, Egypt had moved on from the era of massive stone pyramids. They were smaller now, tucked into cliffs, or hidden underground. But the memory of Giza still lingered. And with that memory came fear. See, Egypt had enemies. To the east were the Canaanites and the rising powers of Mesopotamia. To the south, the Nubians. These were not peaceful neighbors. Trade sometimes gave way to war. And when it did, pharaohs needed a way to intimidate fast. What better way than to point to the desert and say, "We did that"? Think about it. You're a foreign envoy walking into Egypt. You've seen temples before. You've seen kings and crowns. But then someone brings you to Giza, and you see the Great Pyramid for the first time. That's not just architecture. That's psychological warfare. It towers above the horizon. Its base stretches wider than any city square you've known. Its sides are so straight, it looks fake, and someone leans over and whispers, "We built this 1,000 years ago, with bare hands." Just imagine what we can do now. Some historians believe that the continued maintenance of the pyramid complexes long after their construction was a deliberate strategy. A message not just to the gods, but to other nations. And sometimes that symbol could be cashed in. One scroll from the New Kingdom period even implies that the Great Pyramid was considered one of Egypt's greatest gifts from the ancestors. A cultural treasure, but also a national shield. A symbol that said, "We are ancient, we are powerful, and we will outlast you." Enter the Nubian campaigns. Around 1500 BCE, Egypt began an aggressive military expansion southward into Nubia, rich in gold, ivory, and soldiers. These campaigns were expensive. They required ships, supplies, and full-time armies. Where did the money come from? Some of it came from temple offerings, some from taxes, but a big chunk came from selling monuments. Not dismantling the Great Pyramid, but mining older pyramids and temples that were less iconic. The limestone casing stones that once covered smaller pyramids, stripped and shipped. The granite blocks from abandoned tombs, taken for fortress walls. The pyramids became currency. In one campaign, the spoils taken from southern tombs were used to fund an entire season of warfare. Dozens of chariots, hundreds of mercenaries, all paid for with bits and pieces of Egypt's past. Not the Great Pyramid itself, of course. It was sacred, but everything around it became fair game. Even temple statues were hauled away, melted down, or offered to powerful allies in exchange for troops and supplies. It's like tearing down your own museum to buy a tank. But that wasn't the only way pyramids paid for war. They also helped through belief. In Egypt, victory wasn't just about swords and soldiers. It was about divine will. Pharaohs claimed that their success on the battlefield came directly from the gods, and the pyramids were proof of that relationship. The bigger the pyramid, the stronger the king's connection to the heavens. That's why temples were rebuilt near old pyramids, long after they were used. That belief translated into something powerful, morale, to borrow the power, to remind the people, and the soldiers, that Egypt had been blessed since the time of Khufu. And to their enemies, it was intimidating. You weren't fighting a man, you were fighting a bloodline that built the impossible. Egyptian armies marched into battle, singing hymns that traced their pharaoh's lineage back to the builders of Giza. They believed they were defending not just land but destiny. But like all empires, the cost caught up. When too many tombs were robbed, too many temples dismantled, too much treasure melted down, the soul of the kingdom began to rot. By the time of the late period, even foreign rulers, Persians, Greeks, Romans were looting Egypt's ancient monuments to pay their own debts. The pyramids had become an ATM for conquerors. Gold, stone, glory, all withdrawn. And yet, the Great Pyramid survived. You could argue it's the only one that did. While other pyramids were stripped to nothing, Khufu's stubborn triangle refused to collapse. Maybe it was too big, maybe too sacred, or maybe everyone just agreed. This one stays. And because it stayed, it became more than just a building. It became proof that Egypt could do the impossible. That it had once stood alone as the light of the ancient world. That even in war, even in loss, even when its treasures were hauled away in crates, it still had this one massive, immovable fact. We built this. We are still here, unshaken. And even now, centuries later, when the gold is gone and the armies are dust, the pyramid remains. Picture this. You're standing in the middle of a great desert, wind whipping your face, dust curling around your ankles. The sun beats down on you like it's trying to brand your bones. You turn around, and there it is, the Great Pyramid. Silent, proud, still here. But not everything is. Because tonight we're not talking about a physical collapse. Not stones falling, not walls cracking. No, this is about something much harder to see, much easier to miss. The slow, creeping collapse of the very thing that made the pyramids possible. Society. When people ask why the ancient Egyptians stopped building giant pyramids, they usually expect a simple answer. Not enough money, not enough workers. A shift in religion, and sure, all of that played a role. But what really ended the age of pyramids wasn't a single event. It was a slow unraveling. A fraying of faith. A wobble in the system. A moment when the center stopped holding. Let's rewind to the Old Kingdom, the so-called Pyramid Age. Egypt was unified. The pharaoh was treated like a god. The economy was strong. The Nile flooded like clockwork. And then, it did. Suddenly, the whole system that had kept the pyramids rising broke down. For several years, maybe even decades, the Nile's floods came late, or not at all. Crops failed, grain stores ran dry, people starved, and when people starve, they stop building monuments. They stop trusting gods. They stop listening to kings. Behold, the land turns round as does a potter's wheel. The poor man has become rich, and the rich man has become poor. The temples are destroyed. The pyramids are cast down. And we're not just guessing. The ancient Egyptians wrote about it. Text from the first intermediate period, the time right after the Old Kingdom collapsed, are filled with despair. One of the most famous, the Admonitions of Epoa, reads like an ancient doomsday blog. Now we don't know how literal that last line is. The pyramids themselves weren't toppled, but their meaning was. Because here's the thing, the pyramid wasn't just a building, it was a promise. A symbol that the world made sense, that kings ruled by divine order, that if you worked hard, paid your taxes, honored your gods, you'd be rewarded. But when famine hits and people die, and kings do nothing, that promise dies too. And once it's gone, why build another pyramid? Let's talk about logistics. And pyramids? They require unity. Instead of one voice, Egypt became 100 whispers. The pyramid system only worked when Egypt had centralized control. That meant powerful bureaucrats managing grain, labor, tools, and sacred texts. But after the Old Kingdom fell, Egypt splintered into mini-kingdoms. Local warlords took over provinces. Cities raised their own armies. Temples hoarded what wealth remained. But here's the emotional core. The pyramids didn't fall because of stone or starvation. They fell because belief cracked. People no longer saw the pharaoh as a god. They saw him as a man, a weak, dying man, who couldn't stop the sky from drying up or the earth from turning to dust. That shift in perception was seismic. You don't stack 2.3 million blocks without someone in charge of every rope, every meal, every calendar, and when that control vanished, so did the means to build the impossible. It's why later pyramids got smaller, cheaper, hidden. They were still sacred, but the awe had faded, the ambition had thinned. You don't try to touch the sky when you're not sure there's a god waiting at the top. Think about it. If the Great Pyramid was a monument to divine power, then its emptiness became a curse, a haunting reminder of a system that promised immortality and delivered dust. And here's where things get really strange. Some later rulers, especially in the Middle Kingdom, copied the old pyramid. Look, they built fake ones, outer shells that looked grand, but inside, mud brick, shallow chambers, collapsing ceilings. They were imitations of greatness, hollow echoes of what once was. A historian might say, the culture declined, but really, it shifted. Instead of stone pyramids, people started focusing on personal tombs, smaller shrines, temples. The power of the state gave way to the power of the individual. Commoners started writing spells on their coffins. Priests gained more influence. The religion adapted. It had to. Because the pyramids had failed to stop death. They had failed to protect the kings. They had failed to keep the land fed. But they hadn't disappeared. And maybe that's what made them so dangerous. They still stood. Still watched. The power that was now gone. Because their very presence reminded everyone of a golden age. A time when Egypt had one ruler, one vision, and the power to carve immortality into stone. The pyramid became a mirror, and what people saw in it hurt. It reminded them of everything they'd lost: order, faith, control. And instead of rebuilding it, they turned away. Let the sand creep in. Let the gods grow quiet. And yet, even now, after all the chaos, famine, war, and forgetting, they're still there. The pyramids didn't collapse. We did. And maybe that's the lesson. But if you lose the belief that built it, you can stack stones 100 feet high. You can carve your name into granite. You can build for eternity. It's already gone. It sounds ridiculous. Rocks can't talk, right? But tonight we're going to step into a part of the pyramid story that very few people have ever heard of. Because among all the strange tales of cosmic math and ancient power, there's one idea that stands out like a whisper in the dark. What if the stones were never meant to stay silent? Let's start with something you can measure. The Great Pyramid was built from several different types of stone. The core blocks are mostly rough, local limestone. The casing stones, once smooth and shining white, came from Tura limestone, purer, denser, and polished to reflect the sun. But inside the king's chamber, it's all about granite. Huge black-red slabs of Aswan granite, dragged hundreds of miles up the Nile. That the stones of the Great Pyramid were once alive, not like a heartbeat or a soul, but spiritually alive, charged, activated, singing. Granite is heavy, brutal, nearly impossible to cut with copper tools. And it has something very important inside it: quartz. Now imagine you're building a sacred structure and you choose granite for your most important room, and not just because it's strong, but because it might do something else. Quartz is a crystal, and quartz has a weird little trick. It's piezoelectric. That means if you squeeze it or strike it, it produces electricity. Nothing you'd want to plug your phone into, but still a measurable natural charge. Some Egyptologists believe that the builders of the pyramid knew this, maybe not in our scientific terms, but through feeling, tradition, or ritual. They may have believed the stones held spiritual energy, something you could unlock. There are legends, scattered across ancient texts, that say stones used in sacred buildings were awakened before being placed. That rituals were performed over them, chants, incense, sacrifices to make them living stone. A kind of sacred activation, not just material, but charged with purpose. And here's where it gets seriously weird. That sounds fringe. But think about how deeply Egypt's religion relied on ritual objects. Statues weren't just art, they were gods. Once consecrated, they were fed, bathed, dressed. Sacred texts weren't just read, they were performed. Words had power. Names had power. Even the way you walked through a temple had to follow exact patterns, or the gods might turn their backs. And when those stones were set into the pyramid, they weren't just dead weight. They were participants in the ritual of eternity. So why not the stones? Why wouldn't the very material of the pyramid be part of the ceremony? One idea is that this sound wasn't for humans at all. Some fringe theorists go even further. They say that when the pyramid was complete, cased in mirror-like limestone, capped in electrum, vibrating with chants from the inner chambers, it acted like a kind of tuning fork, a structure that sang, that resonated with the Earth's natural vibration, that amplified life itself. That the pyramid was meant to speak to the gods. Imagine that a monument that didn't just point toward the stars, but called to them through sound, through frequency, through sacred harmonics buried deep inside the granite bones of the king's chamber. Of course, mainstream archaeologists don't go this far. They point out that there's no ancient Egyptian manual on how to charge your pyramid. No text telling priests to chant into rocks. But they do admit the acoustics are unusual, that standing in certain chambers feels strange, that some sounds vanish, others expand, some cry. And people who've spent time in those chambers, musicians, engineers, monks, skeptics, report feeling things they can't explain. Some hear humming. Some describe a sudden sense of vastness, like the walls just pulled away, and they were standing at the center of something enormous. So let's pull back for a moment. What if this wasn't about technology at all? What if the Egyptians weren't trying to build a machine, but a presence? In that view, the pyramid wasn't just a building, it was a being, not alive like a tree or an animal, but alive in the way a mountain feels alive, or a thunderstorm, something bigger than you, something that knows, a structure that echoed the heartbeat of the cosmos, a place where time blurred, a temple where stone didn't just sit still, but listen. Even now, tourists step inside and lower their voices. They move slowly. They hesitate to touch the walls. Not because someone tells them to, but because something in the space says this matters. That's why people still treat it with awe. And that's the emotional heart of it. They were chosen, carved, placed with purpose, stacked not just to defy gravity, but to contain something, power, meaning, presence. You don't drag 80-ton blocks of quartz-rich granite hundreds of miles just to make a square room. You do it because you're building something sacred, something that has to last. Whether or not the stones were alive, they were never just stone. You just have to be quiet enough to hear it. Something that can still speak, long after your voice is gone. And maybe, just maybe, it still is. Its lion body is crouched like it's guarding a door no one can see. Its human face stares across the desert with unreadable calm. But underneath that battered stone, beneath those pores that press into the earth like anchors, may lie something more than limestone. Let's walk past the pyramids now. Not far, just a little to the east. There, in the half-shadow of the Great Pyramid, rests a creature so weathered, so ancient, so odd, that for centuries, even the Egyptians barely spoke of it. The Sphinx. Tonight we're going underground. Others whisper about societies. Some say it hides secrets. There's an old legend that's passed through generations of mystics, fringe researchers, and dreamers. It says that beneath the Sphinx is a hidden chamber. A library, they claim, a vault of ancient wisdom, a place called the Hall of Records. What's in it? No one agrees. Some say it holds lost text from Atlantis. Others claim it's full of scrolls written before the Great Flood. Some even believe it contains prophecies about the end of the world, sealed off, waiting for humanity to become worthy of the truth. Sounds like a conspiracy theory, right? Maybe, but here's the twist. There actually is something under the Sphinx. In the 1990s, a team of researchers using ground-penetrating radar scanned the area around the Sphinx, and to their shock, they detected anomalies, empty spaces beneath the surface. One long rectangular cavity near the pores, another, deeper chamber just southeast of the monument. And while this doesn't prove anything, it begs the question, so let's lean into the story. Egyptian authorities have always been quick to shut down wild theories. Officially, there is nothing of significance beneath the Sphinx. And yet, full excavation has never happened. Permission is notoriously hard to get, and those who press too hard often find themselves quietly sidelined. What's down there? Because even if the Hall of Records is a myth, someone invented it, someone believed it, and belief, especially in ancient Egypt, was its own kind of truth. The idea of a hidden chamber full of sacred knowledge goes way back. In Egyptian religion, Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing, was said to have hidden his greatest teachings in a secret location, only to be found by a future initiate. One legend describes a book of all knowledge buried in a royal tomb protected by curses, traps, and serpents of fire. Sound familiar? Now add the Sphinx to the mix. This half-lion, half-human creature wasn't just a statue, it was a symbol, a guardian. In Egyptian mythology, creatures like the Sphinx were placed at the gates of sacred spaces, not to scare but to test, to judge if you were ready, worthy. And what better place to hide a secret than beneath the ultimate guardian? Here's another twist. The head of the Sphinx is too small for its body, and it's out of proportion. Some researchers think it was recarved, possibly from an earlier lion's head, reshaped into a human pharaoh's face, centuries later, because the body is much older than the face. Why? And if it is, then who built it? Geologists have pointed out that the deep weathering on the Sphinx's body appears to be from rain, not just wind and sand. But rain hasn't been common in Egypt for over 5,000 years. That means the Sphinx could be even older than the pyramids, maybe much older. Mainstream archaeology credits it to Pharaoh Khafre, builder of the second pyramid at Giza, but there's no inscription linking him to the Sphinx. No dedicatory text, no clear timeline. It's as if the Sphinx was already there, an ancient relic, even to the ancient Egyptians. And that makes the idea of a hall of records beneath it just a little more plausible. If something survived a forgotten civilization, if knowledge made it through a global catastrophe, wouldn't you hide it somewhere sacred, somewhere indestructible, somewhere watched over by a creature who never sleeps? Let's imagine it. You're standing between the Sphinx's paws. The wind hushes, the sand shifts, and beneath you, a slab of stone stirs. A trapdoor, untouched for millennia. Inside, shelves carved into rock, lit by the warm glow of oil lamps that never burned out. Scrolls of papyrus and gold, maps of stars that don't match our sky. A history we weren't supposed to remember. That's the dream. And even if it's not real, it reflects something very human. We're always looking backward, always searching for the moment we forgot something important. A time before the noise, before the rush, before we traded wonder for Wi-Fi. And even if we never do, the Sphinx will keep watch. Silent, cracked, unmoving. The Hall of Records isn't just a chamber, it's a longing, a hope that somewhere, someone wrote down the truth and left it where we could find it, but still guarding something. Maybe a secret, maybe a chamber, maybe just the idea that there is more to know. They're not building a pyramid today. It's early morning, the kind where the light hasn't quite committed to being daylight. The shadows are long, the desert is quiet, and a line of workers is already forming, carrying tools, baskets, and folded linen on their backs. They're leaving one, because their work is finished. But there's no celebration, no parade, no inscription carved in their honor, just a quiet dispersal, as if they were never there. Tonight, we're talking about something the pyramids don't like to share, the people who built them, and then disappeared. And in the centuries to come, their names will vanish, their stories will vanish. Even the entire village they built around the pyramid will slowly fade beneath the sand. Let's get this straight right away. No, the pyramids were not built by slaves. That's one of the most persistent myths in history. We know now that the builders were skilled laborers, craftsmen, stoneworkers, bakers, haulers, even artists. Many of them were regular Egyptians, working on royal projects as a form of corvée labor, mandatory service instead of taxes. Sounds like a decent job, right? People lived there, slept there, cooked stews over clay fires, told jokes, complained about the heat, and every morning they got up to move another block of stone. And they weren't mistreated. Excavations of workers' villages, like the one discovered at Hayt el Ghurab just south of the Sphinx, tell a surprising story. These weren't grim labor camps, they were organized communities, with bakeries, breweries, even a hospital. But here's the mystery. When the pyramid was complete, they vanished. Just gone. No tombs nearby, no records of where they went, no list of names to honor them. And that's strange. So why weren't the builders remembered? Because ancient Egyptians were obsessed with memory. Names, faces, deeds, they all had to be remembered. To be forgotten was a fate worse than death. It meant your soul couldn't live on in the afterlife. Some scholars say they were just not by name, maybe through rituals or anonymous carvings or mass burials. But others argue something more unsettling, that the builders were never meant to be remembered, that they were tools, not heroes. Temporary hands borrowed by kings who only carved their own names in stone. It's like building the world's greatest monument and leaving no credit roll at the end. But there are clues. At the workers' village, archaeologists found bones, many with stress fractures, arthritis, and signs of repetitive strain. People who had hauled stone for years, but they also found carefully prepared graves, with meat offerings and jars of beer. That suggests these workers were respected, at least by those close to them. Still, none of their stories survive. No scribe Mary, who carried water to the stonemasons. No Nefru, painter of sacred stars. No Senenmot, who set the capstone with his own hands. What was it like to build something you knew would never have your name on it? So we're left to imagine, gone. Would you feel proud? Would you feel used? To spend 10, maybe 20 years waking up in dust, hauling blocks heavier than cars, sweating through linen shirts, just so a king could be remembered forever. Maybe that's why they did it. Or would you feel something deeper, that you were part of something bigger than yourself? Because even if they weren't named in history books, even if their tombs were shallow and unmarked, their work still stands. You can touch it, but whose life built the spine of a legend? Right now, someone is walking past the Great Pyramid and running their fingers along a stone that was placed by a man whose name we'll never know. Someone who may have had a family, a favorite song, a limp from years of work. Because what's even more mysterious is that this happened over and over again. After the Great Pyramid, new kings started their own projects, new crews assembled, new villages appeared, and that legend drew in the next generation. We find their tools, their jars, their bones, but not their names. It's as if the workers of Egypt moved like shadows, appearing, laboring, fading, like whispers that left behind stone instead of words, then vanished. One theory, that the pyramid crews were rotating workforces, farmers who came to Giza during the flood season, when their fields were underwater. They worked for a few months, earned a ration of bread and beer, then returned home. If that's true, it would explain the lack of long-term records. They weren't permanent residents, just seasonal hands. Ancient temp. But even that doesn't answer everything. Some researchers say no. They argue there was a shift during this period. A sudden fear, a rebellion, maybe a natural disaster that struck the ruling family down before their tombs could be finished. Others think it's a sign of political instability, a time when kingship passed too quickly between rulers, with no one sitting on the throne long enough to complete a full pyramid. That happened in later eras too. The farther we move from the grandeur of the Fourth Dynasty, the age of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, the more fragile the system becomes. Shorter reigns, smaller pyramids, more projects abandoned, mid-chisel. This is it. You know that feeling when a dynasty is running out of steam. You can feel the exhaustion in the stones. The ambition is there, but the fuel's running low, the will is weakening. And maybe the saddest part, it's as if the pyramid builders still wanted to make something immortal. But something had changed. The magic was flickering. The spell was wearing thin. Most people have never heard of these failed pyramids. They visit Giza. They gasp at the Great Pyramid. But just a few miles away, pyramids like Sekhemkhet's lie, half buried, half forgotten. No guidebooks, no postcards. It's a grave for a dream that never finished growing. But don't feel too sorry. Because in a strange way, these unfinished pyramids are more human than the perfect ones. They show us what happens when plans don't work out. When death comes early, when power slips through your fingers. And yet, someone still tried. Someone still carved stone with blistered hands. Someone still lit a fire at dawn and passed bricks hand to hand under the sun. Someone still believed, even for a little while, that this pile of stone would carry a soul into eternity. And maybe that's enough. Even unfinished, even broken, the pyramid remains, and some are never paid in full. But as a reminder that every dream has a cost. Not as a monument to power, but he wasn't just there to conquer land. He brought along a team of scientists, engineers, scholars, even artists. It was one of the first military campaigns in history that marched not just with muskets and cannons, but with notebooks and measuring tools. And for one night, just one Napoleon decided to sleep inside the Great Pyramid. In 1798, a young general named Napoleon Bonaparte arrived in Egypt with an army and a dream of empire. Napoleon stood in the shadow of the pyramid during one of the hottest summers Egypt had ever seen. The structure had already been looted centuries earlier, its gleaming casing stones stripped away, its secrets dug into by treasure hunters and tourists alike. But even in ruin, the Great Pyramid dwarfed everything around it. What happened next is a mystery he took to the grave. Let's set the scene. It's a granite-lined box with no decoration, no throne, no treasure, just a single empty sarcophagus. He ordered to be taken inside. No guards, no scholars, no distractions, just him. A single lantern, and the deepest, darkest chamber of the most famous monument on earth, the King's Chamber. Napoleon lay down next to it. What he experienced in those hours alone, in the bowels of a structure older than his country, has never been confirmed. But something happened. When he emerged the next morning, he was pale, quiet. Aide-de-camp after aide-de-camp asked him what had happened inside. But all he said was, and stayed the whole night. You would not believe me if I told you. That's it. He never wrote it down. He never discussed it in public, not even in his memoirs. He kept the secret all the way to his final days on St. Helena, surrounded by nothing but ocean and memory. Some say he experienced a vision, a moment of clarity or madness, that he saw the entire arc of his life, including his eventual exile and death, that the pyramid showed him everything he would gain and everything he would lose. So what did he see? Others say he felt something ancient, not ghosts, not spirits, but presence, something that watched him from the dark corners of that granite chamber, something that didn't need a body to be real. Maybe Napoleon lay there, surrounded by stone, and realized the weight of legacy. But maybe the truth is more human. And then there are the more fringe theories that Napoleon uncovered a lost relic, a sacred object, something still hidden beneath the pyramid that bent time and fate around it. That his silence was protection, not embarrassment. He, a man with armies and ambitions, was sleeping in the heart of a monument that had survived empires. Pharaohs who had ruled longer than France had existed were now dust, and yet their pyramid still stood, still watching, still remembering. Maybe it humbled him, and so he stayed quiet. The idea that no matter how many wars he won, how many crowns he claimed, he would never build something like this. He would never be worshipped for 5,000 years. He would never have his own pyramid rising through eternity. Because what can you say after that? This moment, Napoleon and the pyramid, has become one of the strangest footnotes in history. It's whispered about in books, dramatized in documentaries, used as a symbol in esoteric traditions, a single night of silence that echoes across centuries. And it fits, doesn't it? Because the Great Pyramid has always worked like that. That granite chamber, it's like a mirror, just not the kind you can see your face in. It reflects your beliefs, your doubts, your place in history. You think you're going to study it, measure it, conquer it, but the moment you step inside, something flips. It studies you. Napoleon came to Egypt, expecting to take something. Instead, he left with something he never talked about. Writers, explorers, mystics, soldiers. People have walked into the pyramid thinking it's just stone. Then they come out different, quieter, unsettled. Some stop their expeditions altogether. Others go the opposite direction and dedicate their lives to decoding the pyramid's secrets. And he's not the only one. Not with magic. Either way, the pyramid changes you. But with scale, you are skin and breath. You stand inside it, and every cell in your body realizes you are temporary. The pyramid is forever. And maybe that's why Napoleon said nothing. because to say something would have broken the spell, would have turned mystery into anecdote, not a secret. Instead, he let it haunt him. Let it sit in the back of his mind through every campaign, every defeat, every lonely exile. A memory, one that no one else could ever understand. And that, in the end, is what the pyramid always gives. Not treasure, not power, just a question, one that stays with you. Let's talk about numbers. But don't panic, this isn't a math class. You won't need a calculator, just an open mind, and maybe a soft towel to mop up the moment your brain starts leaking from the side of your head. Long after you leave. And yet, it's there. Because tonight we're exploring one of the most baffling parts of the Great Pyramid, its mathematical precision. Now, we've already covered the blocks, the chambers, the myths. But behind all that stone is a kind of silent intelligence, a level of planning that should be impossible for people working with copper tools and no electricity. Let's start with the basics. The pyramid was originally about 14.6 meters tall, that's 81 feet. Over time it's lost a little height, mostly because its smooth outer casing stones were stripped away, but even in its current state, it still stands around 38 meters. Now here's the weird part. If you take the total height and multiply it by 2 pi, you get a number extremely close to the length of each side of the base. Let me rephrase. The Great Pyramid's height relates to the circumference of a circle perfectly. It's like the builders knew pi 3.145292 and used it to turn a triangle into a kind of stone circle. Which is weird, because there's no record of ancient Egyptians calculating pi the way we do today. They had estimates, they used approximations. But this level of precision shouldn't exist. Maybe it was accidental, maybe not, and yet it does. Each side of the pyramid's base is about 230.4 meters. If you measure all 4 sides and add them together, you get 91 to 1.6 meters. That's the full base perimeter. Now here's the kicker. Take the pyramid's height, again around 46.6 meters, and multiply it by 6.28, which is 2 pi, again. You get 921.6 meters. But let's go deeper. It's a perfect circle-squared ratio. Or did they? Historians still argue whether this was on purpose or a beautiful accident. But either way, it's astonishing, especially for a civilization with no measuring tapes, no laser levels, and allegedly no understanding of high-level geometry, because the math doesn't stop there. The pyramid is perfectly aligned to the cardinal directions: north, south, east, west. Not kind of aligned, not mostly lined up. It is within 0.05 degrees of true north. That is more accurate than some modern buildings. They didn't have compasses. Those weren't invented until 1,000 years later. Most likely they used the stars, especially the star Thuban, which was close to the North Star at the time. By watching the stars move and marking where they rose and set, they could figure out true north. But that would have taken years of observation, trial and error, patience beyond what most rulers would tolerate. So how? And yet, they did it. Which brings us to an unsettling possibility, that the pyramid wasn't just meant to house a pharaoh's soul. It was meant to mirror the universe. Some researchers believe the dimensions of the Great Pyramid encode not just geometry, but earth science. The ratio of its base to its height reflects the hemisphere of the planet. The total weight of the pyramid has been estimated to be 6 million tons, and if you multiply that by 10^8, you get close to the mass of the Earth. Is that just poetic thinking? Maybe. But some of these numbers go beyond coincidence. They start to feel intentional, like someone built the pyramid to record truths about the world. Not in language, but in shape. A tomb that tells you how to find true north. A structure whose geometry explains the curve of the earth, the value of pi, and the movement of the heavens. It's like a message written in math, left behind not just for priests or kings, but for anyone, in any time, who could figure it out. Imagine that. A monument that doesn't speak through hieroglyphs, but through ratios. It stood in the desert, century after century, while sandstorms buried its base and empires crumbled around it. The knowledge of how it was built faded. The math was forgotten. The people who designed it were nameless. The whole monument was nearly swallowed by time. For most of its life, the pyramid was silent. And here's the emotional twist. But then, someone measured it, and now, that ancient whisper, those ratios hidden in the stone, are echoing again, and found the circle. You don't need to be an engineer to feel it. The angle of the sides, the perfect slope, draws your eyes to the sky. Your brain starts to notice the symmetry. Your breath slows down. You just need to stand there, at the base, and look up. And for a moment, you feel it. It's thoughtful. The pyramid isn't just massive. It was made by people who wanted to lock knowledge into stone. To say, we were here, we understood, we saw how the world worked. And we left this behind for you. Even if you don't believe in sacred geometry or cosmic math, there's no denying one thing. The pyramid is not random. It's a message, written in silence. Read by the stars. You're standing in front of the Great Pyramid. The sun is starting to set. Everything around you glows gold and orange. The stone in front of you, once sharp, now worn, seems to breathe with the heat of the day. And then it hits you. Why? Not how. Not the ramps. Not the copper chisels. Not the sweating armies of workers. But why go through all of it? What drove human beings to drag 6 million tons of stone into the desert to build something that points to the stars? Why did they build this? Let's talk about belief. Because in the end, that's what the pyramids are. A monument not to power, or ego, or treasure, but to a worldview so strong, so unshakable, that people dedicated their entire lives to it. To understand the pyramid, you have to understand the Egyptian soul. The Egyptians didn't see death the way we do. To them, it wasn't an ending. It was a transition, a doorway. The soul moved from the land of the living to the land of the gods. If and only if the journey was done properly. The heart of the dead would be weighed against a feather, the feather of Maut, the goddess of truth and balance. If your heart was heavier, you were devoured, erased. That journey was dangerous, filled with traps, trials, judgment. But if you passed, forever, you lived again. And the pyramid was the launch pad for that journey. Inside, everything had meaning. The passages pointed towards specific stars. The chambers were sealed not just to protect the body, but to guide the soul. The air shafts, once thought to be for ventilation, align almost perfectly with Orion's belt and the North Star. These weren't random choices. The stars were gods. To reach the stars was to reach heaven. And if you were the pharaoh god on earth, you weren't just going to the stars, you were joining them. Becoming a constellation, a celestial being, a divine presence shining over your people for eternity. The pyramid made that possible. As time went on, the pyramid religion spread. The prayers, the spells, the ideas, things once reserved for royalty, were written into coffin texts, and later into the Book of the Dead. Ordinary people began to believe that they too could pass through the afterlife. Not with pyramids, but with proper rituals, with spells and Shepti dolls and offerings. But here's what makes it even more powerful. This belief wasn't just for kings. The pyramid started as a machine for one man's eternity. But over centuries, it democratized immortality. And that's huge. It's like if someone built a spaceship for a king, and eventually the blueprints leaked, and everyone started building their own. That belief, the idea that you could go on, that you could be more than flesh, was powerful. It shaped their laws, their art, their ethics. It's why Egyptian life was filled with ceremony and balance and order, because to mess it up meant not just trouble in this life, but obliteration in the next. A towering symbol that said, there is more. And the pyramid stood as a constant reminder, but it also whispered something else. Time is nothing. Because think about it. What lasts in our world? Not buildings, not governments, not names. But the pyramid, it lasted through war, famine, earthquakes, sandstorms, invaders, tomb robbers, and tourists with selfie sticks. It stayed. The names of the builders are gone, but their belief stands taller than ever. And here's what that does to people today. You go to Giza, expecting to be impressed, and you are. But then you start to feel something else. Not just wonder, not just how did they do it, but in a good way. You start to feel small. You feel like a drop of water in an endless river. One that started thousands of years ago. one that's still flowing. And for just a moment, that river carries you. You understand why they built it. Because they believed something with all their hearts, and they wanted that belief to outlive them. And somehow it did. You're here, thinking about it, listening to it, wondering. The pyramid worked. It transmitted belief across time. No language required, no instructions, just shape and stone and silence. And no matter who you are or where you come from, that message hits the same. It's not about gods or stars anymore. A triangle on the horizon that says there is more. It's about leaving something behind that says, I was here. It's about legacy, I believe. And I didn't need to be remembered. As long as what I built still speaks, the wind is soft tonight. It carries little sand whispers across the desert, like a lullaby from the earth itself. The Great Pyramid looms nearby, not glowing, not shining, just being a dark silhouette against a starlit sky. Older than language, older than memory, and yet it is still speaking. From secrets hidden in stone to unfinished dreams, from stars and chambers and soul journeys to the heavy silence of workers whose names we'll never know. Through centuries of forgotten rituals, crushed rebellions, curious emperors, and mathematic codes baked into the limestone. But what if all of it, every block, every legend, every story, was always about one thing: control? We've come a long way. Because the Great Pyramid is the only surviving wonder of the ancient world, the Hanging Gardens collapsed, the lighthouse fell, the Colossus shattered. Not control as in domination, but control over time. That's the final mystery. Still here, unbroken. But the pyramid, think about that. Across wars, earthquakes, floods, the collapse of entire civilizations, this pile of stones remains, and not by accident. The ancient Egyptians wanted it to last. They designed it to endure, and it did. It endured better than the beliefs that built it. Still whispering through the centuries, still pulling people in. That's a strange kind of immortality. We used to think the pyramids were built to honor gods. Then we thought they were tombs. Then star calendars. Then maybe power machines, or sound chambers, or treasure vaults. One that doesn't need believers anymore. One that just is. And maybe none of them. Maybe they were all of those things. The truth is, the pyramid doesn't need us to understand it. It never did. It just needed us to look, to wonder. And wonder we did, and the pyramid just waits. Napoleon looked. So did Aristotle. So did Ptolemy. And Cleopatra, and archaeologists in leather boots, and dusty school teachers, and teenage tourists clutching selfie sticks. We all come here for answers, because it knows. It knows the power of patience, of stone, of silence. It doesn't need to rush. It was built by people who weren't in a hurry, who thought in eternity-sized thoughts. We live fast now, blink fast, click fast. But the pyramid? It moves like mountains, like time before clocks. And maybe that's what we lost. It invites us to stop, to feel the weight of the past without rushing to name it. To admit that some things are meant to stay mysterious. Perfect lines, perfect angles, perfect absurdity. And yet, even in mystery, it gives us something. Because the pyramid isn't just old. It's perfect in a way that's hard to explain. It shouldn't exist, but it does. And when you see it, really see it, you understand something simple and beautiful. That someone 4,500 years ago cared enough to make something flawless. Not for money, not for applause, but because it mattered. And if they could do that, if they could carve meaning into the bones of the earth itself, maybe we can too. Not with pyramids, but with choices. Belief in something bigger than ourselves. With kindness, with effort, with love, with belief. Belief that the things we build, whether they're buildings or families or stories, can outlast us, can speak long after we're gone.